Look, a little accident happened. The officer admitted to the driver as she was shocked. I would like you to leave my car now, she demanded. The officer then began to get irate as he then forced himself onto the driver. Whoa! What are you doing? The driver said as she was scared for her life. You are going to enjoy this. The officer said as he smiled and began to pull out his penis. No. The driver bellowed as the police officer began to start raping her. 10 minutes must have gone by as the officer got off her. Why did you do that? The driver asked as she was upset and shocked. The officer didn't say anything. Are you going to start this car or what? The officer questioned as he looked around the car and saw the driver license in the driver's mirror. Amy, is it? He asked. Amy didn't know what to say anymore as she was confused at everything. Can you just leave my car, please? Amy replied as the officer shook his head. All of a sudden, he got out of his side and walked to the driver's side. He pulled Amy out of the car, as she didn't want to put up a fight. The police officer got in the driver's seat as he began to fiddle around with the car. Amy rushed around to the passenger's seat as she didn't want to be stranded in the middle of the desert. All of a sudden, the police officer put the Jeep into drive and Amy was holding onto the bar as hard as she could as they were flying down the road. So where are we going? Amy asked as the police officer was using all the training he had to go down the back roads. I don't know. He said. I never even caught your name. Amy asked as they were dodging everything in their path. My name? The officer said as he tried to keep calm. My name isn't important. He said. Oh, come on, you know my name. Amy replied as she was getting a little mad. The police officer looked at her as he was speeding down the road. Slow down or the police will catch us. Amy said as she just wanted to get off this wild ride. We need to get away. The officer said as all of a sudden he pulled out his gun. What are you doing? Amy asked as he began to point it at her. I need to get rid of you. He said. No, no. Amy said as she didn't know what to say. Dude. You aren't thinking straight. Amy said as she tried to calm her down. The officer then slowed down the car as he then began to break out into tears. I can't do this anymore. The officer said. Do what? Amy asked as he was crying. I killed 2 people. The officer suddenly admitted. Amy was startled. Well, I'm sure it was an accident. Amy said as she tried to see the positive side of it. The officer was crying. And I raped you. He said. Don't worry about it. Amy responded as she didn't want to hurt the officer's feelings. You are a good person. Amy said as she was trying to be positive. The officer was in a flood of tears. My name is Jonathan. He said as he put his hand out to shake it. Everything is going to be okay, Jonathan. Amy said as she refused to shake his sweaty hand. You need to turn yourself in. Amy continued as all of a sudden an unmarked police car pulled up behind the Jeep. I can't. Jonathan said as he kept shaking his head. Someone then knocked on the driver's door. Hello. The undercover police officer said. You are blocking the road. They are here. Jonathan boasted as he was getting more and more scared. It's okay, dude, everything will be okay. Amy said as she was trying to calm him down. Unexpectedly, Jonathan put the car into drive and sped off. Amy was shocked as the undercover officer rushed back to the unmarked police car and followed the Jeep in pursuit. What did you do that for? Amy asked Jonathan as he was focusing on the road. Jonathan was manic as he didn't stop the car. We need to pull over. Amy said as the car was going 1,000,000 miles per hour as the police began to chase us. Jonathan didn't say anything as he was looking straight down the road. Amy then all of a sudden grabbed the steering wheel. Stop the car right now. She said calmly as Jonathan looked at her. He didn't want to hurt another person. Jonathan let out a big sigh as he began to slow down the car. The car came to a stop as the police began to surround the car. "Jonathan, come out with your hands up," the police shouted as Amy slowly exited the Jeep. "I was kidnapped," Amy explained as the police came over and handcuffed her. "You can say all of that down the station," the officer said as Jonathan tried to get out of the Jeep, but the officers surrounded him. "You are under arrest for the murders of Officer Brown and George." "George?" Amy said as she overheard the conversation. George? She asked as she had forgotten his surname. The police officer came over and showed her a picture of the dead body. Amy was shaken up as she recognized the man she had an affair with. "Oh yes, that is him," Amy confirmed as the officers wrote it down. Amy was transported into the back of the police car as Jonathan was strip searched. "So what happens now?" Amy asked the officers. "Well, you are going to have to go down the station and answer a couple of questions," the leading officer said as Amy was still in shock that she found out that George had been killed. Amy sat in the back of the police car as she began to get tearful. "I loved him," she said as the officer wasn't listening. The officer then put the car into drive as the car began to start moving away from the scene. "Am I going to get in trouble?" Amy then asked the officer. "Depends how much you will tell us," the officer replied as Amy was nodding her head. "I will tell you everything I know. I didn't kill anyone and I was kidnapped," she continued to say as the car was speeding down the motorway. The car then arrived back at the police station where Amy was being taken in for an interview. "Hello," the officer said as Amy was sitting on the chair opposite. "So tell us everything you know," the officer asked. "Well, I was driving down the road and all of a sudden this guy comes out of the river and runs onto the road, so I stopped as hard as I could and then he just walked into the passenger seat." "I see," the officer said as he was taking notes. "He then got angry at me for not driving, so he came around to the other side and chucked me out," Amy said as she was explaining everything. "So why did you get back into the car?" the officer asked. "I wasn't going to lose my car, I was going to fight for it," Amy explained. "Wouldn't you want to save your car?" Amy asked. "Well, yes, but I wouldn't get in a car with a lunatic," the officer said as he was just trying to trip Amy up. "Well, that's your choice," Amy uttered as the officer was still confused. "You saw the blood on him and yet you went for a ride with him." "I thought it could be paint," Amy said as she lied to the officer. "And you go out with most of your friends covered in paint?" the officer spoke. "I didn't do anything illegal. Charge me or let me go," Amy demanded as she was getting frustrated with everything. "Let's settle down," the other officer said as he could see Amy was getting a little enraged. "Sorry," she said as she didn't know what else to say. "I just want everything to be normal again," Amy continued as she was thinking about George. She began to start tearing up. The officer closest to the wall passed her a dry tissue. "Here," he said as she grabbed it and took it to her eyes. "Thanks," she said. "Okay, I think we are done here," the officer in charge boasted. Amy got up as she began to walk to the door. "Oh, just one more thing," the officer asked. "Why were you dating your nephew?" the officer asked. Amy said as she became bright red. "We didn't know we were related when we met," Amy explained as the officer was suspicious. "Okay, you can go now," he said as Amy opened the door and exited the interview room and left the police station. "I better see my sister," Amy said to herself as she walked from the police station. Amy walked to the bus stop as she had no other way of getting home. The bus pulled in as Amy tried sneaking on. The bus driver tapped on the glass. "Excuse me," he said. "Yes?" Amy responded as she was walking on by. "Money?" the bus driver asked. Amy then blushed as she didn't have any money. She said as she passed him the tissue she was holding. The bus driver was confused. Pay up or get off my bus, he said as Amy then dashed onto the bus as the bus driver opened the door and got out of his cab. Ma'am, money now, or I'm going to get the police involved for fare dodging, the bus driver said as Amy knew she was defeated. Okay, she said as she got off the back of the bus. Amy walked back a few steps as she needed to get her head together. I suppose I can walk for a bit, it would be good to get a clear head, Amy said as she began walking in the direction of her sister's house. It was a long walk as it was very far away, but Amy was enjoying getting in the steps. She continued to smile as the house was just coming up round the corner. Amy then walked up to the front door and knocked on it. Hello, she said as she waited for someone to open up. Hello? Sis, she shouted as she was trying to get a response. I have something to tell you, she continued as no one was answering the door. Amy then looked around as there was no car parked in the driveway. She looked around some more as all of a sudden she spotted the top left window open. Oh, she doesn't normally have this open, Amy said to herself as she tried to close the window. Without notice, she could smell something. Ew, what's that smell? She questioned as she tried looking through the window. She couldn't see anything as out of the blue one of the neighbors came over. Are you okay? She asked. I'm just trying to see if my sister is okay, Amy asked as she closed the window. Oh, no one has been around here for a week, the neighbor explained. Someone took the car and no one has been seen since, the neighbor continued. Oh, Amy said as she didn't know what to say. I'm going to call the police, Amy suddenly announced as she tried to think about what to do. The neighbor nodded her head as Amy dialed the police. We will send some officers over to your location very shortly, the person down the line said. Amy put the phone down as she waited for the police to arrive. 10 minutes went by as Amy was just playing with her thumbs. The police car then came around the corner as Amy could hear the sirens come closer and closer. The police officer then stepped out of the car. Hello, the police officer said as he came closer to Amy. Yes, I just want to do a welfare check on my sister, Amy said as she walked over to the door. The police officer then began knocking on the door as no one was responding. Hello, the officer bellowed as he tried to barge open the door as he couldn't get it open. The other police officer walked around the back of the house as he spotted the window. Is this window always open? The police officer asked. I do not know, Amy said as she began to panic. Sean, come here, the officer said as the other police officer came over and gave him a leg up. The police officer squeezed through the window as he landed on the other side. What's that smell? The officer questioned as he got to his feet. Amy and Sean were waiting outside as the other police officer came and opened the door from the inside. Here, he said as he opened up the door. Let's check all the rooms, the officer said as Sean followed him in and searched every room. Sean slowly opened the bedroom door as he then saw something in the mirror. In here, Dave, he said in confidence. Dave rushed over. They slowly continued to open the door as they then looked up on the bed as they saw a body hanging from the ceiling. Shit, Dave muttered as he went out to inform Amy. I'm so sorry, he said as Amy couldn't believe it. She wouldn't have killed herself. She had so much to live for, Amy explained. Has she gotten into any money problems recently or anything? Dave then asked. I'm not sure, I know she had to take up a second job to cover the losses the sweet shop was losing, Amy admitted. Do you think it was taking a lot on her? Dave then questioned. I don't know, she seemed fine with it, Amy said. Let's not speculate, Dave continued. You are the one asking the questions, Amy replied as Dave then got a little angry. Okay, Dave said as he put away his notepad and walked away. Sean then slowly came over and said. We need to protect the scene. Okay, Amy said as she was walking away from the house. I can't believe it, she said to herself as she took a big deep breath in as she tried to focus. She couldn't believe her own sister would take her life. I thought she was happy, Amy said as Sean came over. Sometimes you think you know someone, but you don't know what they are hiding, he said as he could see Amy was in distress. Thanks, Amy replied as she tried to smile. More and more police arrived at the scene. Do you have anywhere to spend the night? Sean then asked. Amy began to think. I don't think so, she replied as Sean then said. You can spend the night at mine, he said as Amy thought about it. What about no? Amy replied as Sean then began to radio around trying to get some answers for Amy. What about a hotel room? Sean then said. Yes, yes, Amy said. But can you give me a lift? She asked. Okay, Sean said. Just wait till I'm finished here, he continued as he was continuing to do his policing duties. Amy walked to the edge of the road as the police then took the body out of the house. Amy looked at them, removing the body as she began to tear up. I love you, she said as she watched the body being put in the back of the ambulance. She then sat down on the floor as she watched all the police officers do their job. Minutes turned into hours as the sun was setting down as Amy did not move from her spot. Are you ready? Sean said as he was getting ready to end his shift. Okay, Amy said as she got up and smiled. Just get into the back of the car and I will be over in a second, Sean said as he just had a final few things to sort out. 5 more minutes went by as he came to the car. Okay, Sean said as he sat in the driver's seat and put the car into motion. Let's go, he said as Amy buckled up her seatbelt. The car drove off as Amy looked away from the scene. I'm so sorry, Sean began to talk as he was trying to make some conversation. It's okay, Amy said as Sean could see she was upset. It was a long 10-minute ride as Amy didn't really say much. Here we are, Sean said as they arrived at the hotel after a short journey. Do you want me to come in with you? Sean then said. Okay, Amy said as she was still upset. Sean got out of the car and helped Amy out as she was still a little shaken. I'm here for you, Sean said as he was trying to be friendly. Thanks, Amy replied as they walked through the hotel doors. Hello, this young lady has a room by the police, Sean said as he began to explain everything. Okay, that will be room 4A, the hotel receptionist said as she gave Amy the keycard to the room as Sean then said. Are you going to be okay? I don't know, Amy said as she was sad and depressed. Let me take you upstairs to make sure that you are okay. The two of them slowly went up the stairs as Amy was getting sadder and sadder. I don't think I can do this much longer, Amy then admitted. Why? Sean said. It's just too much, Amy replied as they walked to the hotel room. What have I got to look forward to? Everyone in my family is dead and it's just depressing. But remember, you are an amazing person. I can only hang in there for so long, Amy said as she opened the door to the hotel room and went into. Okay, you can leave now, Amy said to Sean. Oh, okay. He looked a little disappointed as he really thought Amy was beautiful. Sean was walking down the hallway as all of a sudden the door reopened. Sean! Amy shouted at the top of her lungs. Sean turned around. Can you stay with me? Amy then said as she had a change of heart. Okay, Sean said as he smiled at her as he rushed over and kissed her. They proceeded to have sex as they slammed the door closed and began to get busy. That's just what I needed, Amy said as she got up and smoked a cigarette. Yes, that was very nice, Sean said as he was getting his clothes on as he gave Amy a big kiss on the forehead. But you do know that was just a one-night stand, Amy admitted. I suppose, Sean as he didn't know what to feel. It was amazing though. He continued as Amy was looking at him. It was a one-night stand, nothing more. Amy said as she put her bra on. Sean got up and put his shirt back on. Okay. Sean said as his phone then began to ring. I got to take this. He said as he rushed out of the room and took the phone call. That was good. Amy said as she felt happier than yesterday. I know this might be shit right now, but there is always tomorrow. Amy said to herself as she looked around the room to see that Sean had left his watch on the table side. Shit. She said as she jumped up and rushed out the room. Sean. She shouted as Sean was nowhere to be seen. I'd better get down this station and return this in. Amy said as she got all her belongings and went downstairs to the hotel's reception. Here. Amy said to the receptionist as she handed her back the keycard to the room. Thank you. She replied as she left the hotel and went back to the nearest bus stop. She checked her pockets to make sure she had enough change to get on the bus. Okay, I got enough. She said as she felt around for the £2 that she needed. The bus then pulled in as Amy then got aboard. You. The bus driver said. You better have the right money this time or I will not be letting you on. He said as Amy pulled out the money and gave it to him. Here you go. She replied as she went to the top deck of the bus. She went to sit down as all of a sudden her phone then began to ring. Who could that be? She said to herself as she sat down at the front. Hello? She said down the line. It was an unknown number. Hey Amy, about last night. The voice said. Sean? Amy questioned how he got her phone number. How did you get my number? I put it in while you were sleeping. Sean replied. Can we meet up? He then added as he was a little nervous about talking to her. What for? Amy asked as the bus began to move. I just want to see you again. I told you yesterday. Amy said as she began to get frustrated with Sean. It was just a one-night stand, I was feeling lonely and upset, it was just sex, nothing else. She began to explain as people started looking at her on the bus. Please. Sean begged as Amy then put down the phone. The phone then immediately rang again as Amy pressed the red button to ignore it. Amy then began to think as she didn't really know where she was going on the bus. I suppose I could meet him for a free lunch. Amy then said as she had a change of heart. She began to dial the number as she thought about last night more and more and how she had never had sex like that before. Sean. She said as the phone answered. We can meet for lunch. She continued as Sean replied. Okay, I got an hour free a little later. We can meet at the little cafe on the corner of Green Street. Amy said as she was looking around on the bus to see who was listening. Yeah, that would be great. Sean replied as Amy then put down the phone as she was Googling how to get to the cafe. Oh yes. She said to herself as she got up from the bus. She needed to do some walking. She proceeded to get off the bus at the next stop. Thank you. She said as she got off and sat at the bus stop for a second to gather her thoughts. Am I doing the right thing? She asked herself as out of the blue a car pulled up. Need a ride, love? The driver said. Amy didn't say anything as she was out of it. The driver honked his horn. Amy jumped as she was knocked for 6. Excuse me? She said. Do you need a ride somewhere? The driver asked. Amy then thought about it as she needed to get to the cafe but didn't really want to walk. Okay. Amy said as she put down her phone and began to enter the car. My name is Carl. The driver explained. So where are we heading? Carl continued to ask as Amy then said. Green Street. Okay. Carl said as he put the address in the GPS. So what do you do for a living? Carl asked as Amy then explained how she was a part-time nurse at a local nursing home. How long have you been doing that? Carl asked as he was driving down the road. Just 7 or so years. Amy explained. Do you like doing that? It pays the bills. Amy said as she was watching everything go by. So do I have to pay for this ride? Amy then said. No, just being a good human. Carl said as he smiled in the mirror. Amy looked at him with his black teeth and rotten gums. So how long have you been a driver? Amy asked. A taxi driver? Carl replied. I have never been one. He smiled as Amy then began to freak out. What? Amy said as she was dumbstruck. Do you just go around picking up people off the street? She said as she tried to open the door. It was locked. Carl then laughed as they continued to drive down the road. Let me out, you freak. Amy said as she was kicking the door, trying to open it. Please settle down and enjoy the ride. Carl said as he then laughed. Who are you working for? Amy asked. What do you mean? Carl responded. Who asked you to get me? Noon. Carl replied as he was dodging traffic and driving crazily down the road. Amy then began to pull out her phone. You forget I have this. Amy boasted as Carl looked at her. No. He belted out as Amy then dialed Sean's number. Hey Sean. Amy said as Carl then slowed down the car. He stopped the car as he went to the back and pulled the car's back door open. Give it to me. Carl said as he was getting angry. Go away you creep. Amy shouted as Carl was getting on top of her. No please. Amy said as she kept kicking him. Go away. She shouted louder and louder. Carl then closed the door behind him as he locked it. What are you doing? Amy said as Carl was all over her. He smiled as he showed his black teeth once more. Amy didn't say anything as she didn't have the strength anymore as she gave up. Carl then unzipped his pants and began to rape her. Amy held everything in as she began to tear up. 10 minutes had passed as Carl then began to put on his clothes. Thanks. He said. Thanks? Amy replied as she was angry at him. You just used me like a little play doll. Amy said as he got up and followed him out the car. Get back in the car. Carl said as he suddenly snapped. Get back in the car. He shouted as he was really angry at Amy. No. Amy simply said as she didn't do what she was told. I'm not your plaything. Amy said as she looked around on the floor. She saw a brick. All of a sudden, she picked up the brick and smashed it against Carl's head as he wasn't looking. Carl fell down to the floor as Amy couldn't believe what she had done. All of a sudden, the phone rang. Amy picked up the phone as she didn't know who it was. Are you okay, Amy? The voice said down the line. Yes. Amy replied as she couldn't believe what happened. Are you still coming to the cafe? The voice said. Sean? She replied. I can't, something comes up. She then explained. Oh, why did you try to phone me earlier? Sean then asked. Sorry, that was a butt dial. Amy admitted. Oh. Sean said as he sounded sad. It's okay, I know you don't like me. Sean said. Amy didn't know what to say. You are a great friend. Amy said as she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Okay. Sean replied. Have a great time, whatever you are doing. Sean said as Amy was panicking. Sean. She suddenly said. I have done something bad. She continued to explain. Sean didn't know what to say. Okay? He replied. And where are you right now? He then asked. I'm at the local gas station. Amy said as the car was in the alleyway behind the gas station. Okay. I will get over there as soon as possible. Sean said as Amy was just standing there as she didn't want to touch the lifeless body. 15 minutes had gone by as Sean on his bicycle then came up the street. He came to the back of the car. What is this? He said as Amy was just standing there, looking over the body. Sean then put his bicycle down as he walked towards Amy. "Amy?" he said. Amy didn't say anything as he then saw someone on the floor. "Amy?" he asked again as he grabbed her hand and saw the scene. "Did you do this?" he said as Amy wasn't saying anything. "It was an accident," Amy suddenly said as Sean was taken aback. "I didn't think you had it in you," Sean said as he saw the brick covered in blood. "So what are we going to do?" Amy said. Sean said as he had to begin thinking about what to do. "We have to move this body somewhere. Do you have the keys to the car?" Sean asked. "He should have them on him," Amy said as Sean put on his gloves and began to start feeling around the body. "Here," he said as he picked them up. Sean then threw the keys to Amy as she put the keys in the car engine. "Okay," Sean said as he began to sweat buckets. "I'm going to need you for this bit," Sean said as he opened the car door. "I need you to pick up the legs," Sean said as he began to pick up the torso and used all his strength to move the body. Amy was helping move the lower part of the body as they placed the body in the back of the car. "Now what?" Amy said as Sean picked up the brick. "We are going to need this as well," he said as he put it in the back. "Get in the car as we got to go now," Sean said as he was really panicking as he didn't want to get Amy in trouble. Sean started up the car as Amy got in the passenger seat.